Hopefully this doesn't take too long. I timed myself, but okay, hopefully this doesn't take too long. Gemara Bava Metzia says much to lie about how much you've learned. So I'd like to welcome everyone to my 11th Siyum. I don't think the Gemara means you're allowed to lie that way. The Gemara Bava Metzia Kaf Gimel Beis going to the top of Kaf Aleph talks about a case, says if you lose something and you want it back, but you don't have a simon on it. So it says if you're a person who only lies about 3 things, so you don't need a simon, someone can just give it back to you directly. So what are these 3 things? Mar says one is Masechta, how much you've learned. One is Poria. Rashi translates that as being someone asks you if you were with your wife last night, so it's not so appropriate, so you'll have to lie and say no even if you were. And the third is if you're a guest at someone's house, they ask you how good of a host someone is. So, and they're a very good host, so you're allowed to lie and say that they're only okay, right? Because the Gemara calls it lashon hara if you overly praise someone, because that'll lead to bad things, rather than people take advantage of them. Presumably, you can't lie and say that they were terrible hosts, because that's lashon hara in the opposite direction. But I think the point is that if they're exemplary, so you'll have to say that they were pretty good, so people won't take advantage of them. People won't think they're bad people either. So I think people quote the Gemara saying you're allowed to lie about 3 things, but I don't think that's Pshat. Pshat is talking about this point of Shabbos Aveda, because the Gemara says that the pasuk says that Adrosh Achicho so by Shabbos Aveda. So the Gemara Darshan says Shehu Shalei Ramai. There's a chiyuv to make sure that the guy's not lying. What does that mean? It means that he has to give simanim on the object. So I think the point is that if someone is so above and beyond in honesty, if he never tells a lie except about these 3 things where it makes a lot more sense to lie than tell the truth, so then that itself is a kiyum of making sure he's not a liar, because you know he's not a liar, so him saying it isn't himself knowing he's not lying. Right? And we know this because there are other cases the Gemara says where you're not allowed to lie. The Gemara Suvo stuff, Yizayim and Aleph, the last line of Tesayim and Beis going to Yizayim and Aleph, says, what do you say at a wedding? So Beishamai says you say Kalat Moshehi, you say something good about the bride, whatever she is. So if she's ugly but has pretty eyes, you say she has pretty eyes, whatever it is. And Beis says Kalana v'Chasuda. You say she's beautiful whether or not she actually is. And we pause like Beis Hillel, and Tosfos points out, even according to Beishamai, you're allowed. It's not that you're not allowed to lie. This is obviously a case where you're allowed to lie. Beis Shammai just didn't like the idea of institutionalizing this lying, because that seems like a violation of Midbar Sheker Tirchav. So they didn't want to institutionalize it. But in theory, in an individual instance, this would be considered to lie, right? Because it's the Rashi al Torah quotes the Gemara about being Mashanim Nei Shalom, right? Sarah says that she can't have kids because Avram's old, and Kadosh Baruch Hu said when he tells over the story of Avram, he says because Sarah said she was old. So you're off life Nei Shalom. So the Rambam helps Zel Vevera Parak Yidal Healthy Gimel says Pshat in the Gemara the same way that I said, that it's not talking about what you're allowed to lie about. It's talking about this chiyuv of Darshei Shlei Ramai. But he has a fourth. He says someone who only lies in these 3 things, and who's only also Mashanim Nei Shalom. So he seems to think that the Gemara says that someone who only lies when it's mutter to lie is who lies always when it's mutter to lie. It's not that he's above and beyond. It's, I guess, only lying when you're mutter to lie for the average person is above and beyond being incredibly honest, and therefore there's no problem of being of Darshei Shlei Ramai because he himself is not being a Ramai. The Gemara and Rambam both say that he has to be Talmid Chacham. Unclear exactly why it's not by Talmid Chacham. Maybe it's Norah from the Milsa that someone so honest would also be Talmid Chacham, or maybe Norah from the Milsa that Talmid Chacham would also be someone so honest, or maybe it has to be Talmid Chacham for some reason. The Marsha asks on this says, what's this Poria thing? It doesn't make any sense. It's not that you're allowed to lie about it. You shouldn't dignify that with a response. Someone asks something so inappropriate, what's going on? He says it's not Poria, it's Bipuraya. That it's mutter to pretend like you're drunk on Purim even if you're really not. You're allowed to lie there. Okay, so is there any other case when you're allowed to lie? So the Gemara clearly has some sort of dispensation for lying, not lying, but for in the normal course of learning, if you have to say something that's not really true to get to the evidence in the end, so it seems to be okay. There are a few cases in the Gemara where someone would say, where a Tan and a Amora would say something, Rabbi Kiva or an Amora would say something blatantly false, and the Gemara says, well, how do you say that? We know that's not true. It's L'chades L'Talmidim. He had to make his Talmidim had to hear it, and they would think, and they would ask questions, and they would get to the emet, and they would get to the truth by realizing what he said was wrong and why it was wrong, and that'll help him remember better or whatever. That helps him get to the truth eventually. And again, the Kaf and Aleph. There's an interesting story. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that if you already get any story or not, it's kosher. So the Gemara says Levi said that over in Shiur b'Shem Rebbe, and the people didn't accept it because Rebbe's das yachid, and so they didn't paskin like it because he's das yachid. So Levi, Rashi explains, Levi knew that the halacha was really like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So next time he said in Shir, he said this is what the majority hold, and then everyone listened to it. So it's another case where because he knew that he had to get to the right halacha in the end, so he was allowed to change something a little in order to get it. Tosfos actually explains the Gemara the exact opposite way. Tosfos says that the Talmidim in Yeshiva knew the halacha. So when Levi says it over B'Shem Rebbe, so they know Levi's not right because he's quoting Das Yachid, and it has to be that the halacha is that way, so it has to be B'Shem Rabbim. So they didn't accept the statement. They didn't accept that Rebbe was the one who said it because they didn't know the halacha. So when he later on said it in Shir B'Shem Rabbim, so they accepted that's the right Shmuah because it has to be B'Shem Rabbim. It has to be the majority opinion because that was the halacha. The Tosfos in Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Beis. The Gemara in Bava Metzia Kuf Yud Aleph Beis tells an interesting story. It's there's an Amora who's talking to Eliyahu Navi and he's asking questions. Eliyahu Navi's giving answers, and one of the questions he's asking shilas in this non-Jewish cemetery. So he says to Eliyahu Navi, wait a minute, you're Pinchas. Pinchas is a Kohen. How are you allowed in the cemetery? And Eliyahu Navi says back, didn't you learn Taros? The Brisa says that Rabbi Shimon holds that Kivrei Akum are Matami B'Ohel, and it's all in Ohel. And Tosfos asks, and I says, wait a minute, we don't pass like Rabbi Shimon. What's going on? So Tosfos says that Eliyahu Navi was being doel to him with answers that weren't true. Tosfos even quotes a day that he gives him a few reasons why this wouldn't be the case, why it'd be much better Eliyahu Navi in the cemetery. He says maybe Eliyahu Navi wasn't even a Kohen, and apparently, so Eliyahu Navi thinks that it's okay here to some of the answer, right, if he's really a Kohen, he's saying what Rabbi Shimon holds mutter. So A, the fact that Rabbi Shimon holds mutter is irrelevant, and B, he's not even a Kohen, he should be correcting that. So clearly there's some sort of leeway for not saying exact truth, because apparently again, everyone says it in Yeshiva and you learn, and you get to the emes in the end by way of this. The Rambam in Hilchos Tumas Meis, Paragraph Halacha Gimel, says based on this Gemara, well, Eliyahu Navi quoted Rabbi Shimon, so it must be passing like Rabbi Shimon. So the Rambam says that Kivrei Akum Art Matame the Oha. I found about this. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Tells the story of Chiel. He was a general of Achav's army. He tried to rebuild the city of Yericho. Yeshua put a curse, and he tried to rebuild the city of Yericho. The Gemara explains what exactly he thought, why he thought bad things would happen to him, but all of his kids died. So Eliyahu Navi went to Achav and to Chiel to Menachem Abel for Chiel, and it says he went to him Beit Tamya. Beit Tamya should be based to Me'am, it should be cemetery. So Rashi there, presumably coming to deal with this kasha of, well, how's Eliyahu Navi in a cemetery? Because you know Eliyahu Navi is Kohen. So he says Tamya really should be Tama in Aramaic. The Gemara sometimes switches letters around, and it means the Shiva house. It doesn't mean the cemetery, meaning where the Levaya is taking place. But you can read the Gemara Pshuto, if the Gemara is just telling his midrashim that he's in a cemetery, he's visiting them at the Levaya, because this Gemara may be saying like those that Eliyahu Navi is from Bnei Rachel, Bnei Leah, or Bnei Leah and Bnei Leah, he's not a Kohen. There's a sugya. The sugya connected to this, whether or not you're allowed to distort something when paskening, whether Yesh koach yacham lakar davar in Torah b'kum v'aseh. The Gemara in Vamos has a discussion on what it says. We know that you're allowed. The Chazal is allowed to remove a deraisa, not remove, to tell you to be mevatel a deraisa b'sheva taisa passively. For example, right? We don't take a lulav on Shabbos even though in the Torah you have to on the first day. We don't blow shofar on Shabbos even though in the Torah you have to on the first day. Because Chazal felt that the chances of somebody Machal Shabbos, the risk there outweigh the reward of people doing this mitzvah right? So they said you just sit and do nothing, and we know Chazal is allowed to do that when they see a real necessity. But the question is, the Gemara is asking, can you do it actively? So the Ramban says that you know that Chazal really can. We know that they can. And the Gemara is searching for a source. The Gemara is not really trying to figure out if they can. Tosfos says, all right, we'll get to Tosfos in a minute. There are a few other Tosfos that say like this Ramban. Tosfos in Nazir and Tosfos in Avodah Zarah say it's Davar Pasha that Chazal can be over Davar in Torah b'kum v'aseh when he is a lashon when there's panim v'tam for it. This is weird. What's this panim v'tam? Meaning Chazal aren't going to be willy-nilly getting rid of mitzvos for no reason. So clearly they have a reason to begin with. So panim v'tam presumably means that they have more than just a normal reason to do it. They have a over-the-top reason to be over something b'kum v'aseh, and Tosfos says that's a davar pasha. So I thought maybe, because the vast majority of the cases of where we're open over in Torah b'kum v'aseh have to do with either heter gunos or mamzeris or this case of maybe it's shaykh to be Meshachar and Eved Ivri, if Eved Kanani, sorry, which is an Isra say if he can't have kids. Because we say that Sheves, Lo Tobra, Sheves Zara, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world so we could have children. So it's an important mitzvah, and it can trump others. So that's what the Panamitam means. The Sharman Yitzhak Malacha is a great sefer on, he has in both Kuntras Shulchan Aruch and Hashas. So he has a little kuntras called, I think it's called Kuntras Talmud Torah Klali Hara. It's all about how to learn how to paskin. I think first they printed his little pamphlet, then they printed in the back of the last chelek of the Sharman Yitzhak Malacha on Kuntras Shulchan Aruch, and now they printed in the beginning of the first chelek, whatever it is. He points out, and part of it, after going through everything, he says, so B'derech Klal, in what concept are we making, what concept are we machmir? And he says, Hilchos Nida is a concept where he says in very strong language that you have to be very sure yourself before you can machmir Hilchos Nida, because otherwise you're removing Kuruvu, you're removing children, right? We have this concept of Sheves. So I thought maybe that's what Panamitam would mean, but Tosos in Avodah Zarah Daf Gimel Aleph is clearly not like that. The Gemara in the beginning of Avodah Zarah talks that it says usher to buy things from a guy, from a Ovid Avodah Zarah, on a day that's a holiday for that Avodah Zarah, or 3 days before in Eretz Yisrael, 3 days after also in Eretz Yisrael. It's a great Rambam to know. I didn't write it down, so I don't know exactly. It's Rambam Hilchos Avodah Zarah, either Hey Halach Dal or Perak Dal Hey. That was censored. It says in our editions Hakananim Bisman Azeh Ovid Avodah Zarah Haim, and in Eretz Yisrael it's usher to buy from them ever because Sunday is a holiday, and 3 days before and 3 days after you lose the whole week. Look at the Frankel, he says, it doesn't say Kanan, it says a noter. That Rambam gets censored a little. So the Gemara says the Gemara has very harsh penalties for someone who violates this Isser, because we don't want it to look, of course it looks like your model of Avodah Zarah, we don't want it to look like your model of Avodah Zarah. So the penalty for buying an animal from them on the holiday is that you have to chop the animal's legs off. Very harsh penalties. And Tosu says, oh, but it's Tzar B'alei Chaim. So he says, Yesh koach me'acham lakar when there's a Panamitam for it. So it can't be that it's just about things that have to do with having kids, because this isn't a case of something that has to do with having kids. So it could be there's some sort of larger framework. It could be that, in general, it's a case-by-case basis, that Chazal had to see whether there was an over-the-top reason for applying Yesh koach here, and each case is judged individually whether or not it applies to this concept of Sheves. Tosin Yevamos gives a second time when you say Yesh koach ve'achamim. He says if Chazal make it hadavar dom l'doraisa, they make it look like a din d'oraisa, it's okay. Meaning you can't say a derabban can trump a d'oraisa because that's bad. But if you trick the people into thinking, if you trick the hamanam to thinking that it's a d'oraisa trumping a d'oraisa, so that's okay. So you have to make it look like a d'oraisa. Rav Shafter always says that the Chazon Ish was not fond of this Tosos. He didn't think that it could be that Tosos said such a thing. So he said Tosos really holds the Ramban. Tosos himself does hold the Ramban, but Tosos in Yevamos here actually says this also. Tosos says both cases. He said, so the Mariel takes this Tosos even further. The Mariel says that what's an asmachta? The Mariel in the Kutuk Simon Ayin in the back of the Sefer, I think maybe Osayin, it's not really Simon, says that when the Gemara says something's an asmachta, we have a halacha that's derabanan, it's an asmachta. So that means that was one of these cases where it's a din derabanan, but Chazal tried to package it as a deraisa because they wanted to give it more strength so that people wouldn't go against it. The Ram helps Mamre impair. This is the polar opposite of the Ram helps Mamre impair that halacha test, where the Rambam says that Chazal allowed to make zera because they have to protect the din of deraisa. So that's fine. And then he says, but they have to tell people it's derabanan, because if you tell people it's deraisa, so you're adding on a 614th mitzvah, or maybe you wouldn't be counting the mitzvahs anyway. But you're adding on a mitzvah to the mitzvahs of Torah, and that's an issue deraisa bal tosif. So Tosaf says the only way to be Oker Davar Min Torah B'Gum is to do this. The Ram says this is usher. You can't do this. It's okay. Regarding this, the famous sheet of Yam Shel Shlomo that seemingly pretty clearly doesn't hold the Tosos. Yam Shel Shlomo Bava Kama Perak Dalet Simon Tes. All right, the Gemara said he quotes the Gemara. The Gemara tells a story on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph that the Romans sent 2 officers to learn Torah from the Jews. They can see what's in it. And Chazal taught in Torah called Torah Kula. Presumably this is a very dangerous proposition because if there were things in the Torah that the Romans didn't like, so bad things would end up happening. Right? The Romans would say, you guys are racists, whatever, and it'd be bad. And at the end, so the 2 officers come and say to Chazal, everything in the Torah is true. We learned to call Torah Kula, everything's true, except for these 2 halachos that seem to be prejudiced against non-Jews. So it could have been bad. So the Yam Shlomo says, well, why did Chazal tell him this? Why didn't they just not say anything? Or why didn't they just give the wrong answer? So he says lying about what the halacha is Yarek V'Yalach. That's the chiddush of the Ramosha quotes in a few places in Shuvos. That's the chiddush of the Yam Shlomo. There's a Chasam Sofer, another famous Chasam Sofer, which is seemingly the exact opposite of the Yam Shlomo. Chasam Sofer has a letter in the Kovetz Shuvos Siman Ches to the Maratz Chias. It's about the whole controversy with Halanas Hameis. It's a nice historical controversy there about what to do. So where the Chasam Sofer says, it's sometimes you have to use the word lahalos to raise, to exaggerate the level of an isser in order to stop people from violating. He points out, he says in the Tshuva there, that there are people, this is the start of the Maskim, start of the Reform, there are people who, you tell something it's derabanan and it's inconvenient for them, so they'll just throw it out the window. They won't do any derabanans. And here, because this was a hot button issue between the Maskilim and the Chachamim, this Halanas Hameis issue, so even though the Maratz Chias is quoted a sheet, I think of the Chavos Yair that says that it's only derabanan, Chasam Sofer said, don't say that. You can't say that. We have to tell everyone it's deraisa and it has to be deraisa because it's clear the Chasam Sofer doesn't necessarily hold Maker didn't deraisa. He says the Ramban says deraisa, but if he did, he would have just said you're wrong and who you're quoting is wrong. He clearly thinks that maybe there's some sort of reason for this that it's derabanan, but he says you have to say it's deraisa because otherwise it leads to bad things. Moshe in his Chuvos, not in the Dibros Moshe. The Dibros Moshe has Chuvos in the back of some of the Masechtas. I don't know all of them. I think some of the Masechtas in the back of the Chuvos. In my roommate Chanuk pointed this out to me. In the back of the Chuvos, in the Chuvos in Siman Dalet Oz Vav, Moshe says this Chasam Sofer is against the Yam Shlomo. How can he do that? So Moshe explains the Chasam Sofer. He says the Chasam Sofer doesn't really mean that you can lie and change the halacha and say something that's mutter is also or something that's derabanan and it's really deraisa. He's saying it's a machlokas, and it really could be like the Ramban. In theory, we don't have a raya brew the Ramban's not correct. It could be like the Ramban. So when necessary, the Chasam Sofer is saying that you could just quote the Ramban and not quote the Deis HaCholkim, even if you wouldn't hold the Ramban, even if this day, even if the one who says deraisa is a yachid and the Rab say the Rabbanan, you could just quote the deraisa and leave the Rabbanan off the table, and that way people will listen to it. It's clearly the Maram Shik, who's a Talmud Muvhak of the Chasam Sofer, didn't hold of the Chasam Sofer Shita like Ramosha. There's the Maram Shik and another famous controversial tshuva about Matzitza B'Peh, when this was an issue also 200 years ago, in Yordei Simin Shin Lam Ches. He says that he called Matzitza B'Peh, Rosh Hashanah always says that it's B'derech Melitza Halachon L'Shem Sinai. Because if you call it Derabanan, people say, well, it's a Derabanan, and they'll get rid of it, and these are the Maskilim who want to get rid of Bris Milah altogether. So he couldn't allow it to happen, because once you lose part of it, it's easy to get rid of the rest. So he said it's a Halachon L'Shem Sinai. So he clearly thought that even though there's no sheet in the Rishonim who's going to say that this is Halachon L'Shem Sinai, he thought it's okay presumably based on the Chasam Sofer's call that sometimes in order to protect the halacha, you have to be Ma'alas Eser. So Yom Shlomo himself realized that there's a major kasha on him. The Gemara Megillah, Daf Testament Aleph, I think, going on to Testament Beis, tells the story of the Septuagint. It's not the same Septuagint that we have nowadays, but when Ptolemy gathered in 70 or 72 of the Chachamim in to translate the Torah, and it says they changed a few things that will look like Apikorsis. They changed Nasa Adam to Asa Adam. They changed 12 things altogether, I think. So he says that's not a kasha because what they changed because they had a skam and shemayim before they changed because it was a nace, right? All of them were put into different rooms. They all came up with the exact same change in the translation. They all translate everything perfectly the exact same way. So it was a nace. So there was a skam and a shemayim that this was okay for them to do.